The armored fighting vehicle. Imagine a battlefield in the late 15th century, shrouded in the thick, sulfurous smoke of early black powder. Through the haze, a massive, sloped wooden shell rolls forward, crushing the mud beneath its heavy wheels. There are no horses pulling it. There are no soldiers pushing it from the outside. Instead, its circular perimeter bristles with light cannons, firing in a terrifying, continuous radius. Inside the claustrophobic wooden hull, plunged in darkness and choking on gun smoke, 8 men frantically turn a system of heavy hand cranks to keep the Leviathan creeping forward. This is Leonardo da Vinci's armored fighting vehicle, a machine that is routinely described today as the world's first tank. The design was drafted around 1487. At the time, Leonardo was living in Milan, seeking patronage from Ludovico Sforza, a powerful duke with immediate territorial ambitions. To win the duke's favor, Leonardo penned a letter boasting of his ability to design indestructible, covered chariots that could break through enemy ranks, safe from artillery fire. The corresponding sketch, preserved today in the Codex Vallard, remains one of the most iconic pieces of Renaissance engineering. The physical anatomy of the machine is as beautiful as it is brutal. Leonardo envisioned a heavy timber shell, conical and sloped like the carapace of a tortoise, a shape specifically engineered to deflect incoming arrows and primitive cannonballs. A reinforced cupola at the top would allow a commander to peer out over the battlefield and direct the men below. To move this immense weight without exposing draft animals to enemy fire, the machine relied entirely on human muscle. Leonardo designed a complex internal transmission. The crew would turn 2 large cranks, which engaged a series of interlocking wooden lantern gears, translating human kinetic energy down to 4 massive iron-reinforced wheels. But this is where the story shifts from a marvel of early engineering into a centuries-old mechanical mystery. If you look past the intimidating exterior and study the top-down schematic of the internal gears, there is a glaring, impossible contradiction. The gears, exactly as Leonardo drew them, are positioned in reverse. It is a documented fact of the blueprint. If a team of master carpenters and blacksmiths took this exact drawing and built the transmission precisely to the master's specifications, the machine would be entirely paralyzed. The front wheels and the back wheels would try to spin in opposite directions. The internal gears would lock against each other. The vehicle would tear its own wooden transmission apart the moment the sweating crew tried to move it. Leonardo da Vinci designed a weapon centuries ahead of its time, but his blueprint contained one fatal flaw. There is no historical record that this armored vehicle was ever constructed. No physical prototype has ever been unearthed in an Italian castle, and no splintered debris has ever been found on a Renaissance battlefield. Because of this missing physical evidence, the flawed blueprint is the only truth we have, and the absence of a working model has given birth to a powerful legend regarding Leonardo's true intentions. According to later claims and modern theories, the reversed gears were not a mistake. They were a deliberate act of sabotage. One version of the story asserts that Leonardo, a man who famously despised the cruelty of war and referred to it as a bestial madness, designed a terrifying weapon to satisfy his warlord patron, but secretly built a mechanical kill switch into the drawing. If the Duke ever forced his engineers to build it without Leonardo's direct supervision, the weapon would simply defeat itself. Another theory suggests a more practical form of Renaissance espionage. Intellectual property did not exist in the 15th century, and engineers lived in constant fear of their ideas being stolen. The reversed gears might have been a deliberate trap, ensuring that any rival who stole the plans would waste a fortune building a useless, immobilized husk. The most ordinary explanation, however, is that it was simply a draftsman's error. Leonardo was working quickly, conceptualizing a complex 3-dimensional transmission on a flat piece of paper, and absent-mindedly drew the gear tracks pointing the wrong way. The missing explanatory notes mean we will never know for certain. But the sabotage theory survives because it perfectly aligns with the mythos of a genius whose mind operated on hidden frequencies. We are left only with the ink on the page, a terrifying vision of mechanized warfare that anticipated the 20th century, yet remains permanently anchored to the parchment, paralyzed by the stroke of a pen. The most famous war machine of the Renaissance was perfectly designed to fail. The aerial screw. In the dusty silence of a 15th century Milanese workshop, there sits an impossible object. It is a massive, cumbersome structure, standing roughly 15 feet high, bound tightly together with iron wire and heavy cord. Its skeletal frame is constructed from long, stiff reeds, spiraling upward around a central wooden mast. Stretched across this framework is thick linen canvas, aggressively painted with liquid starch to seal the pores of the fabric and make it entirely airtight. From a distance, it looks like a gigantic, flattened drill bit resting on a circular wooden platform. But this machine was not designed to bore into the earth. It was designed to screw itself into the sky. 500 years before vertical flight was realized, Leonardo da Vinci drew this device, the aerial screw, a machine that dared to treat the invisible atmosphere as if it were a physical body of water. The documented reality of this invention survives in the pages of Manuscript B, a notebook Leonardo compiled around 1489. The anatomy of the object is hypnotic in its ambition. At the base of the central mast, 4 men were meant to stand on a platform, gripping heavy wooden crossbars. To operate the machine, they would run in a continuous, exhausting circle, forcing the massive linen spiral to spin. According to Leonardo's accompanying notes, if the structure was turned rapidly enough, the starched canvas would compress the air beneath it, generating enough upward force to lift the entire heavy apparatus straight into the air. Leonardo was taking an ancient tool, the Archimedes screw, which had been used for centuries to pull water upward out of rivers and flooded mines, and applying its geometry to the sky. Long before the formal study of aerodynamics, his mind intuitively grasped that air possessed density, a fluid thickness that a machine could theoretically bite into. Over the centuries, this single drawing has grown into a powerful modern legend. It is relentlessly celebrated in museums and documentaries as the world's first helicopter. Popular retellings claim that Leonardo solved the riddle of vertical flight during the Renaissance, and weakly supported accounts suggest he may have even successfully flown tiny, spring-loaded models made of paper and thin wire to prove his concept. The image of the aerial screw has become a cultural icon, representing a lone genius who supposedly conquered the skies before the invention of engines. But the mystery of the aerial screw lies in the fatal gap between paper and reality. There is no missing prototype waiting to be unearthed in a forgotten vault, because a full-scale aerial screw could never have left the ground. The missing evidence here is not a lost machine, but a lost century. Modern physics and engineering analyses reveal exactly what would happen if a Renaissance crew attempted to launch it. The period materials available to Leonardo, heavy timber, forged iron, and thick canvas, created an inescapable trap of weight. No amount of human muscle power pushing against those wooden bars could ever generate the immense rotational speed required to lift that much mass. Furthermore, the drawing lacks an anti-torque mechanism, the crucial tail rotor found on modern helicopters that prevents the cabin from spinning out of control. If a crew of 4 men somehow managed to generate enough force, the massive canvas blade would likely remain anchored by the air, while the wooden platform beneath them spun violently in the opposite direction, leaving the men dizzy and earthbound. Yet this mechanical impossibility does not destroy the mystery. It deepens the tragedy of the object. The aerial screw was not a functional helicopter, but rather a theoretical ghost trapped in the wrong era. The legend survives because it forces us to confront the profound isolation of a visionary mind. Leonardo da Vinci had conceptualized the raw physics of vertical lift, but he was physically imprisoned by the heavy materials of the 15th century. The aerial screw remains a beautiful, haunting monument to an idea that was perfectly formulated, desperately waiting for the future to catch up. The underwater breathing apparatus. Imagine the black, freezing waters of the Venetian lagoon in the dead of night, right at the turn of the 16th century. A strange object breaches the surface, a small, silent cork bell bobbing like a piece of stray driftwood. Beneath the water, tethered to that cork by hollow cane tubes, a man is sinking into the darkness. He is wearing a heavy leather suit, his face hidden behind thick glass lenses and a terrifying spiked mask. This eerie figure is not a monster from Renaissance folklore. It is a blueprint for a phantom soldier. It is Leonardo da Vinci's underwater breathing apparatus. The documented grounding for this strange machine comes from a period around 1500, when Leonardo was serving as an engineer and military consultant for the Republic of Venice. The floating city was gripped by the terrifying threat of an impending naval invasion by the Ottoman Empire. To counter this massive fleet, Leonardo looked away from the sky and into the murky depths of the canals, designing a covert method of defending the harbor from below. The anatomy of the diving suit, detailed across sketches in the Codex Atlanticus, was a masterclass in early survival engineering. The diver wore a sealed leather jacket and trousers, fitted with a specialized mask equipped with glass goggles. To breathe, the diver relied on two flexible tubes made of reinforced cane, which snaked up to a floating cork disc at the surface. One tube to inhale and one to exhale. To control depth, Leonardo even designed a leather bag, acting much like a modern buoyancy compensator, which the diver could inflate or deflate to rise or sink in the water column. The most visually jarring element, the bizarre array of spikes jutting out from the mask, were rumored in later lore to be a defense against sea monsters, though they were more likely designed as a physical barrier to keep the diver's breathing tubes from being accidentally crushed against the rough wooden hull of a ship in the dark. The documented function of the suit was pure, cold sabotage. These underwater commandos were meant to stealthily walk across the lagoon floor, approach the Ottoman galleons from below, and use specialized mechanical augers to quietly drill holes into the enemy hulls, sinking the fleet without ever firing a single cannon. But this is where the history of the apparatus goes dark. No rotting leather suits have ever been recovered from the Venetian mud. There are no naval records, no mercenary payrolls, and no Ottoman ship logs proving that Venice ever deployed this silent, submerged army. According to Leonardo himself, this absence was not a failure of engineering. It was a deliberate act of suppression. In a rare and haunting admission found in his notes, Leonardo claimed that he intentionally refused to describe or publish the mechanics of his final design. He wrote that he kept it hidden because of the evil nature of men, fearing that assassins and warlords would use the technology to commit invisible murders at the bottom of the sea, destroying ships and drowning innocent crews without warning. The most ordinary explanation for the missing evidence is simply that the Venetian military declined to fund the project, viewing the technology as too experimental, or moving on once the immediate Ottoman threat shifted. But the legendary interpretation paints a much darker picture. A genius who successfully engineered a terrifying new realm of shadow warfare, only to suffer a profound moral crisis. Beneath the canals of Venice, Leonardo envisioned a new kind of combat, one he ultimately decided was too dangerous to share with the world. We are left wondering if the first Special Operations Frogman was simply a rejected defense contract, or a weapon deliberately buried in the archives to save humanity from itself. The 33-barrel organ gun. Imagine a chaotic Renaissance battlefield, the air thick with black powder smoke and the sound of charging cavalry. In the mud, a massive triangular cart is wheeled into position by a team of heavy draft horses. A wooden lever is thrown, and a rack of 11 iron barrels unleashes a devastating synchronized volley of lead across the enemy line. But as the smoke from the blast clears, The gunners do not frantically reach for their powder horns and ramrods. Instead, they turn a crank, rotating the entire massive triangular frame. The smoking barrels rotate downward to cool. A freshly loaded row of 11 barrels clicks firmly into place at the top, and a third row at the rear is simultaneously reloaded by the crew. It is a continuous, mechanical rhythm of slaughter. This is Leonardo da Vinci's 33-barrel organ gun. The documented schematic for this heavy weapon dominates a page in the Codex Atlanticus, standing as one of his most aggressive and highly detailed military designs. In the 15th century, the earliest firearms were terrifying but possessed a fatal tactical flaw. They were incredibly slow to load. A gunner would fire and then stand entirely defenseless in the open while laboriously packing loose powder and lead ball down the muzzle, leaving infantry units highly vulnerable to a rapid cavalry charge. To solve the deadly vulnerability of early firearms, Leonardo designed a mechanical wall of fire that anticipated modern warfare by 400 years. The physical anatomy of the machine was elegantly brutal. Built on a heavy, wheeled artillery carriage, it consisted of 33 separate gun barrels arranged in 3 fan-shaped rows of 11. The fan shape was deliberate, designed to spread the lead balls over a wide, sweeping arc to maximize casualties across a charging front. But the true genius lay in the triangular rotation block. By mechanically separating the stages of firing, cooling, and loading into 3 distinct rotating steps, Leonardo was attempting to engineer an unbroken rate of suppressing fire. Because of this chilling, continuous fire concept, modern retellings often attach a legendary title to the blueprint, claiming Leonardo invented the world's first machine gun, or the direct mechanical ancestor of the Gatling gun. But the reality of the weapon exists within a strict historical and mechanical boundary. The organ gun was not a true automatic machine gun. It did not use self-contained cartridges. It did not harness recoil or gas pressure to cycle the next round, and it could not load itself. Every single one of those 33 barrels still had to be painstakingly packed by human hands in the rear position. More importantly, the physical evidence of its existence remains entirely missing. To build this weapon would have required an immense expenditure of bronze or iron, demanding a Renaissance foundry capable of casting 33 perfectly identical, high-pressure barrels that would not burst upon firing. There are no surviving foundry receipts to prove that any warlord or prince ever funded its construction. No shattered triangular frames or specialized fan racks have been dug out of the mud of European battlefields. The most ordinary explanation is that this drawing was a high-concept pitch, a terrifying theoretical illustration drafted by a visionary engineer trying to secure a lucrative military contract. It may have simply been too heavy, too expensive, and too complex for the metallurgical limits of the era to actually field in a chaotic war zone. Yet the blueprint survives in our collective memory, because it reveals a dark, industrial pragmatism in the mind of an artist usually celebrated for divine proportions and delicate brushstrokes. We do not know if the organ gun ever truly rotated on a battlefield, spitting continuous fire into the ranks of oncoming men. But the drawing alone stands as a chilling prophecy, a blueprint of mechanized devastation that waited patiently in the archives until the rest of the world's technology finally caught up to its cruelty. The Great Kite. High above the city of Florence, the steep limestone ridge of Mount Cecere drops away into the wind. In the imagination of aviation historians, a terrifying scene plays out on this precipice. A massive bat-like structure of pine and raw silk, shivering in the updraft, is poised at the edge of the abyss. A man is strapped into a heavy leather harness at the center, staring down at the jagged rocks far below. He is not Leonardo da Vinci. He is the test pilot. Leonardo's most complex flying machine was brilliant on paper, but a centuries-old legend claims it left the page and claimed a victim. This is the mystery of the Great Kite. For years, Leonardo obsessively studied the mechanics of the sky. He dissected bird wings, meticulously mapped wind currents, and compiled his findings into the famous Codex on the Flight of Birds. He did not want to merely float in the air. He wanted to conquer it through human-powered mechanical flapping, a machine known as an ornithopter. The physical anatomy of the Great Kite was terrifying in its ambition. Reconstructed from Leonardo's intense structural sketches, the machine possessed a massive 18-meter wingspan. It was designed to mimic the organic, skeletal structure of a bat, utilizing lightweight pine ribs covered in taut, raw silk. It was not a static glider. The blueprints reveal a complex harness equipped with pedals, pulleys, and levers. The pilot was meant to lie prone, actively using his arms and legs to manipulate the wingtips, furiously rowing through the air to sustain flight. The documented grounding for a physical test comes directly from Leonardo's own hand. In his notes, he specifically named Mount Cecere, a peak near Fiesole with a sheer drop, as the theoretical launch site, writing in a prophetic tone, "From the mountain that bears the name of the great bird, the famous bird will take its flight, which will fill the world with its great fame." According to a powerful, enduring legend, that flight actually took place in 1505. The story claims that Leonardo's eccentric mechanic and close assistant, a man named Tommaso di Giovanni Massini, known to history as Zoroastro, volunteered to pilot the great wooden beast. The legend states that Zoroastro strapped himself into the Great Kite, launched off the sheer drop of Mount Cecere, and caught the wind for a brief, vertiginous moment before the aerodynamics failed. He plummeted into the canopy below, surviving the catastrophic impact, but shattering both of his legs. But this is where the story leaves documented aviation history and enters the realm of Renaissance folklore. There is no primary historical document from 1505 proving this test flight ever occurred. The missing evidence is profound. There are no Florentine hospital or guild records confirming Zoroastro's broken bones, no police or city reports of an accident on the mountain, no diary entry from Leonardo lamenting the crash of his masterpiece, and no splintered wreckage ever recovered from the woods. The most ordinary, mathematically sound explanation is that Leonardo simply never built it. After years of intense aerodynamic calculation, he likely realized a devastating biological truth. Human beings do not possess the necessary chest and back muscles to generate enough torque to flap an 18-meter wing. Recognizing that the Great Kite was a death trap, he likely abandoned it on the drawing board. Yet the legend of the crash survives. It persists because of the suspicious silence in Leonardo's later notebooks regarding human-powered flight, leading to a mysterious interpretation that the test did happen, it ended in disaster, and the event was quietly buried to protect the reputation of a master engineer whose ambition had violently collided with reality. The Great Kite remains a symbol of human obsession. The rumor provides a mythological, Icarus-like climax to a lifelong dream of the sky. To this day, looking up at the ridge of Mount Cecere, the historical record remains unresolved. We simply do not know if the Great Kite remained safely in the margins of a sketchbook, or if the blood of a loyal test pilot ever stained the wood of Leonardo da Vinci's greatest dream. The pyramid parachute. Imagine a man falling from the sky. But he is not plummeting to his death, and he is not suspended beneath the soft, billowing silk curve of a modern parachute. Instead, he is hanging beneath a massive, rigid, floating geometric shape. It is a perfect wooden pyramid, wrapped tightly in heavy cloth, drifting in total silence toward the earth. In a world without airplanes, Leonardo da Vinci designed a device with only one purpose: to slow a man's fall from the sky. This is the mystery of the pyramid parachute. tucked away in the margins of the Codex Atlanticus, drawn somewhere around 1485. The sketch of the parachute is incredibly simple but mathematically precise. The anatomy of the device is completely alien to modern aviation. Rather than a collapsible canopy that packs into a small bag, Leonardo designed a massive, rigid structure. The blueprint calls for a square base measuring exactly 7 meters wide and 7 meters deep, constructed from a framework of stiff wooden poles. Over this skeletal pyramid, thick linen cloth was to be stretched tight and sealed with liquid starch to prevent any air from passing through the weave. The jumper would hang suspended from ropes attached to the 4 lower corners of the heavy wooden frame. Beneath the drawing, Leonardo wrote a confident, singular sentence. If a man has a tent made of linen, of which the apertures have all been stopped up, he will be able to throw himself down from any great height without suffering any injury. It is a stunning declaration of aerodynamic faith. But why design a parachute centuries before the invention of aircraft? According to some historical claims and practical theories, the parachute was never intended for aviation. It was envisioned as a terrestrial emergency device, a way for trapped soldiers, engineers, or nobles to survive leaping from a burning watchtower, a crumbling cathedral roof, or a besieged castle wall. But there is a glaring absence in the historical record. The missing evidence is complete. There is no record of a prototype, no invoice for a massive linen tent, and absolutely no documentation that Leonardo ever built or tested it. No brave assistant threw himself off a Milanese battlement to prove the math, and no shattered wooden frames were ever found in a Renaissance courtyard. For centuries, the most common explanation was that the drawing was merely an intellectual exercise, a theoretical thought experiment in fluid dynamics and air resistance that would have been far too heavy and unstable to ever work in the real world. But the mystery of the pyramid parachute survived, and in the year 2000, history was forced to rewrite itself. A British skydiver named Adrian Nicholas constructed the exact device following Leonardo's dimensions, strictly using 15th century tools, pine wood, and canvas. Nicholas hoisted the massively heavy 200-pound pyramid up in a hot air balloon, strapped himself in, and dropped into the sky. And the terrifying wooden structure worked. The bizarre, rigid canopy caught the air and descended with astonishing smoothness, generating more than enough drag to safely lower a human being. It proved that Leonardo's 500-year-old math was completely flawless. The only catch was the final moment of descent. Because the heavy wooden frame would have crushed him upon impact with the ground, the modern tester had to cut himself free and deploy a standard parachute at the very end. The successful test did not close the mystery of the drawing. It only made it more haunting. We do not know if Leonardo built the small-scale model or if he simply trusted his own mind enough to leave the sketch exactly as it was. The pyramid parachute was not a failure of physics, but a machine profoundly out of time. It remains a surreal image, a perfect geometric shape dreamed up by a man anchored to the earth, quietly solving a problem the rest of the world would not face for another 400 years. The pedal-powered paddle boat. Imagine the murky, slow-moving waters of the Arno River in the late 15th century. Against the current, a wide, strange vessel steadily makes its way upstream. But there are no canvas sails catching the wind. There are no oars dipping rhythmically over the sides. There are no weary oxen towing the boat by a heavy rope from the muddy bank. Instead, 2 massive bladed wooden wheels churn the water on either flank, driving the ship forward. And hidden inside the wooden hull, a man is furiously pushing a set of mechanical pedals. Long before the era of paddle steamers, Leonardo envisioned a way to conquer river currents using nothing but human legs and perfect mechanics. This is the mystery of the pedal-powered paddle boat. The documented grounding for this invention sits quietly in the pages of the Codex Atlanticus. In Leonardo's time, river transport was the absolute lifeblood of Italian commerce. Moving heavy timber, stone, and trade goods required fighting the flow of water, leaving merchants at the mercy of unpredictable winds and the exhausting physical limits of oarsmen. To gain a mechanical advantage, Leonardo designed a vessel that looked utterly anachronistic. The anatomy of the boat is a masterpiece of early transmission. Rather than simply attaching oars to a crank, Leonardo designed an internal gear system that solved a highly complex engineering problem: how to transform the alternating up and down motion of a human stepping into continuous, unbroken rotary power. The sketches reveal a dense system of interlocking wooden cogs and treadles. As an operator pushed down with their feet, much like pumping a heavy organ or riding a modern bicycle, the transmission gathered that reciprocating kinetic energy, multiplied it, and smoothly spun the heavy paddle wheels on the outside of the hull. Because of this brilliant internal logic, later historians have claimed this design as the direct conceptual predecessor to the massive steamships that would define the Industrial Revolution hundreds of years later, merely replacing the thrust of a human leg with the thrust of a steam piston. But the mystery of the paddle boat is entirely one of historical absence. The missing evidence here is not a lack of mathematical proof. Modern researchers have successfully built life-sized models of Leonardo's gears and proven that they turn the wheels effortlessly. The missing evidence is that history entirely ignored it. There are no Renaissance shipwright records detailing the construction of such a vessel. No guild of merchants ever commissioned a fleet of them to move cargo faster to the sea. No rotted, paddle-wheeled hulls have ever been excavated from the riverbeds of Florence or Rome. The most ordinary explanation is that, despite the brilliance of the transmission, human muscle still could not sustain the sheer output needed to push a heavy, cargo-laden boat against a strong river current for hours on end. It was an elegant, mechanical solution, fundamentally bottlenecked by human exhaustion. Yet the mechanism itself remains mathematically perfect. The pedal-powered paddleboat survives as a quiet, grounded testament to a mind obsessed with continuous motion. It was not a terrifying weapon of war, nor was it a wildly impossible flying machine. It was a highly practical, beautifully engineered idea that simply vanished into the archives, leaving the rivers of Renaissance Italy untouched by his wheels. The self-propelled cart. Imagine a grand stone hall in Renaissance Milan, cleared of its heavy wooden tables and roaring crowds. In the center of the room sits a small, low-slung wooden cart, roughly the size of a modern go-kart. Suddenly, with a loud, rhythmic clacking sound, it begins to move entirely on its own. There are no ropes pulling it, no hidden animals pushing it, and no driver at the helm. It rolls forward across the flagstones in a perfectly straight line, stops momentarily, clicks loudly, and then executes a sharp, deliberate right-angle turn, as if guided by an invisible hand. 500 years before modern robotics, Leonardo da Vinci designed a cart that didn't just move on its own. It could be programmed. This is the mystery of the self-propelled cart. Drawn around 1478 and preserved in the dense pages of the Codex Atlanticus, the blueprint for this machine is a jarring departure from 15th century engineering. At first glance, the top-down schematic does not look like a vehicle. It looks like the exposed, terrifyingly complex internal organs of a massive clock. The anatomy of the cart reveals a flat, rectangular wooden chassis completely packed with coiled leaf springs, similar to those used in heavy crossbows, alongside massive balance wheels and a labyrinth of interlocking cogs. To power the cart, the operator would use a lever to wind the massive springs incredibly tight, storing immense, dangerous kinetic energy just waiting to be violently released. An escapement mechanism, much like the one inside a modern watch, would ensure the power was released steadily rather than in one explosive, destructive burst. But the genius of the machine was not just in its propulsion, it was in its steering. Leonardo designed the cart's directional wheels to interface directly with a specific set of primary gears. By inserting small wooden pegs into carefully chosen slots along those gears, an operator could dictate exactly when the cart would turn. The pegs acted as physical commands. As the internal gear rotated and a pre-placed peg struck the steering mechanism, the cart would automatically change direction without any human intervention. Because of this brilliant mechanism, later historians and modern engineers have attached a legendary claim to the blueprint. They routinely call it the world's first programmable machine. Long before the invention of silicon chips, punch cards, or digital software, Leonardo had created a flawless system of mechanical memory, presetting a sequence of complex actions that a machine would execute entirely on its own, based purely on physical geometry. But a deep mystery remains anchored to the cart, born from a glaring omission in the historical record. If you study the Codex Atlanticus, Leonardo only drew the chassis, the wheels, and the engine. The missing evidence is the entire top half of the machine. The blueprint is effectively a cliffhanger. What was this highly complex programmable engine actually supposed to carry? We know definitively that it was not a passenger vehicle. Despite modern popular articles loosely and dangerously calling it the first car, the sheer tension of the springs could only power the cart for a few dozen meters at most. Furthermore, the design completely lacks any space for a human driver, and attempting to ride atop the furiously spinning gears and heavy springs would have been suicidal. The most widely accepted, documented explanation is deeply theatrical. During his time in Milan, Leonardo was not just a military engineer, he was the master of ceremonies for Ludovico Sforza, frequently employed to design extravagant stage pieces and mechanical spectacles for the Duke's elaborate festivals. Many historians believe the self-propelled cart was the hidden engine meant to drive an enormous, terrifying stage prop, perhaps an artificial mountain, a mechanical beast, or an armored automaton, that would magically roll out to surprise the wealthy court. A more mysterious interpretation suggests that the cart itself was the experiment. It was a pure exercise in artificial autonomy, an attempt by Leonardo to build a machine that could mimic the intent, decision-making, and memory of a living creature, using only wood and tension. We have successfully rebuilt the chassis. Modern researchers and museums have constructed the cart to Leonardo's exact specifications and proven that the wooden pegs and leaf springs execute their programmed path flawlessly. But the true purpose of the machine remains a ghost. History preserved the brilliant, clicking brain of the very first programmable machine, but it entirely erased whatever it was that Leonardo wanted it to move. The mechanical knight. Imagine a grand, torchlit banquet hall in Renaissance Milan, echoing with the chatter of wealthy courtiers and the clinking of silver goblets. In the corner of the room sits a heavy, shining suit of German Italo plate armor. Suddenly, the room falls dead silent. The empty suit of armor smoothly stands up. It turns its helmeted head, raises one heavy metal arm in a stiff wave, and lifts its visor to reveal that there is absolutely no flesh inside. Decades before the word robot existed, Leonardo da Vinci may have built a metal man that could walk, wave, and raise its visor. This is the mystery of the mechanical knight. Around 1495, while serving the powerful Duke of Milan, Ludovico Sforza, Leonardo was heavily involved in designing elaborate theatrical pageants and mechanical spectacles. But during this same period, he was also diving deep into the grim science of human anatomy. He was obsessively dissecting corpses, mapping the exact tension of tendons, the pivot of joints, and the exact mathematical proportions of the human body. Research that culminated in his famous drawing of the Vitruvian Man. The mechanical knight was the terrifying fusion of those two worlds. It was the translation of biological anatomy into wood, leather, and metal. The documented grounding for this machine, however, is profoundly eerie because it is completely shattered. If you search the sprawling pages of the Codex Atlanticus, you will not find a single, unified blueprint titled, "How to Build a Metal Man." Instead, historians have found scattered, disconnected studies. On one page, there is an intricate sketch of a wooden shoulder joint. On another, a complex cable and pulley system designed to articulate an elbow. The anatomy of the knight was effectively an artificial skeleton. Inside the hollow shell of the plate armor, Leonardo designed a ribcage of wooden gears and taut leather cables that perfectly mimicked the push and pull of human muscles. According to historical reports and contemporary rumors, this empty knight was fully constructed and brought out to perform at a gala hosted by the Duke. Accounts claim the automaton terrified and delighted the court by sitting down, standing up, moving its head, crossing its arms, and, according to one deeply unsettling rumor, even emitting a mechanized drumming sound through an automated jaw. But this is where the historical record leaves the light of the banquet hall and slips into the dark. The missing evidence is absolute. The original physical machine is entirely lost to history. More importantly, the master blueprint itself is missing. We must be incredibly careful not to overstate the certainty of the surviving documents. When you see a modern museum display or a documentary showing a fully functioning, reconstructed model of Leonardo's knight, you are not looking at a direct one-to-one build from a single historical page. You are looking at a modern interpretation. In the 1990s, dedicated researchers essentially had to play mechanical archaeologist, stitching together Leonardo's fragmented, scattered sketches of joints and cables into a unified whole, making highly educated guesses to fill in the gaps. Because of these missing pieces, the true power source of the knight remains fiercely disputed. Was it operated by an internal clockwork drum? Was it tethered to a hidden water wheel outside the palace? The most ordinary, grounded explanation is that it was not an autonomous, walking robot at all, but rather a highly advanced, brilliantly disguised puppetry rig. It required external kinetic input, a human operator hidden behind a curtain, furiously turning a master crank to tighten and release the cables that drove the armor's movements. Yet the mystery of the mechanical knight survives, because it pushes right to the edge of the uncanny valley. It represents a horrifying and beautiful conceptual leap, the realization that the human body is simply a very complex machine, and that with enough gears and pulleys, a genius might be able to replicate it. We know Leonardo drew the bones of this metal man. We have reports that it walked in the 15th century, but the ghost in the machine ultimately vanished, leaving us with nothing but unreadable fragments of its metal soul. The Mechanical Lion. Imagine a grand, torchlit banquet hall in Lyon, France, in the year 1515. The newly crowned King Francois I sits upon his throne, surrounded by the wealthiest nobles of the realm. From the shadows of the hall, a life-sized wooden lion steps into the light. It takes a few heavy, deliberate steps forward, the faint ticking of internal clockwork echoing beneath the murmur of the crowd. It approaches the king, comes to a perfect, autonomous halt, and bows its massive head. Then, with a sharp mechanical click, the lion's wooden chest splits open, spilling a vibrant cascade of fresh lilies onto the stone floor. Of all the incredible machines Leonardo designed, the most legendary one was actually built, only to vanish into history, leaving us to guess at the ghost inside the gears. This is the mystery of the mechanical lion. At the end of his life, Leonardo had left Italy and was living in France under the patronage of the French king. He was revered not just as a painter, but as a master of mechanical spectacles. The anatomy of the lion was meant to be the ultimate royal tribute. The lion was the symbol of the city of Lyon, and the lilies, the fleur-de-lis, were the ancient, unquestioned emblem of the French monarchy. It was a life-sized automaton, heavily textured and painted to look real, designed to operate entirely on its own power. Unlike his impossible flying machines or his terrifying theoretical tanks, we know for a documented fact that the mechanical lion existed. Multiple credible eyewitnesses, including the painter Giovanni Paolo Lomazzo, recorded the event. They wrote enthusiastically about the awe of watching this majestic beast walk forward, stop on command, and open its breast. It was the absolute zenith of Leonardo's Automaton work, a physical reality rather than just ink on a page. Later historians and mechanical experts claim that Leonardo achieved this miracle by repurposing his earlier inventions. The most prominent theory is that he took the engine of the self-propelled cart, that brilliant programmable chassis driven by coiled leaf springs, escapements, and wooden pegs, and placed it directly inside the hollow ribcage of the lion. But this is exactly where the greatest physical proof of Leonardo's mechanical genius disappears into dust. The missing evidence is absolute. The lion did not survive the centuries. And worse, there are no labeled blueprints for it in any of his surviving notebooks. We have disconnected sketches of isolated gears, pulleys, and mechanical legs from this period that might belong to it, but the master plan is completely lost. The most ordinary explanation is that the lion was simply a massive, rudimentary, wind-up toy, driven by heavy springs that eventually snapped, leading the broken machine to be discarded or burned as firewood. But the more mysterious interpretation is that it was a flawless masterpiece, a perfect synthesis of his lifelong obsessions with biology, anatomy, and engineering, lost to the carelessness of history. Today, you can watch videos of beautiful, intricate reconstructions of the mechanical lion walking through modern museum exhibits. But we must be incredibly careful not to mistake modern engineering for historical certainty. Those replicas are brilliant, educated guesses, stitching together his other inventions to fill in the blanks. We do not actually know the exact mechanism Leonardo used to make the beast walk. The story of the mechanical lion survives because it is the ultimate tragedy of the physical object. The only extraordinary, miraculous machine of Leonardo da Vinci's that we know for a fact existed, worked, and was witnessed by royalty was treated as a fleeting party trick. His ultimate masterpiece of engineering walked for a king, and then stepped quietly out of the historical record, swallowed entirely by time. When you close the surviving notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci, you are left with a haunting realization. He is celebrated as history's greatest inventor, yet the physical legacy of his machines is almost entirely composed of ghosts. We have thousands of pages covered in his frantic, mirrored handwriting. We have the ink, the parchment, and the mathematical formulas. But we do not have the metal. We do not have the wood, the shattered canvas, or the rusted gears. From the backwards transmission of a terrifying war machine to the fragmented blueprints of a metal knight, from the impossible weight of an air screw to a vanished wooden lion that once walked for a king, these objects exist in a twilight zone between documented Renaissance engineering and modern myth. They are machines that were born centuries too early, trapped by the metallurgical limits of their era, or perhaps deliberately hidden by a man who understood exactly how dangerous human beings could be. In the end, the missing evidence did not destroy Leonardo's legacy. It secured it. Because we cannot dig up the wreckage of the great Kite, and because we cannot examine the inner clockwork of his vanished automatons, the boundaries of his genius remain open. The lack of proof became the canvas for our imagination. Leonardo da Vinci did not merely invent the ancestors of flight, robotics, and mechanized warfare. By leaving so much unbuilt, unspoken, and unverified, he invented a mystery that 5 centuries of history has still not been able to close.